My name is Jess. This happened about 3 years ago in Las Vegas, and I still think about it more than I'd like to admit. The last night I was there, he knocked on my door, opened it before I could answer, shut it behind him, and sat down on my bed. I want to back up and explain how I ended up in that situation. I had booked a shared Airbnb in Las Vegas, a private bedroom in a home where the hosts also lived. The listing said it was a young couple's place. I had been corresponding with the wife through the app for a few weeks before the stay. She seemed friendly, normal, gave me all the usual information, told me there were 2 dogs in the house, both well-behaved, and that they'd stay out of my room. I was going to be there for 3 nights for a work thing. I had done shared Airbnbs before. It had always been fine. When I arrived, there was no woman in the house. Just 2 men. One of them told me his wife was away in the army, that she'd been deployed unexpectedly and couldn't make it back in time for my stay. He was apologetic about it, said everything was still exactly as listed, that I had full access to the common areas and kitchen, and that he hoped it wouldn't be a problem. I told myself it wasn't a problem. I had already traveled, already paid. What was I going to do? The first red flag I noticed, and I did notice it, I just didn't act on it, was the wedding photo on the wall. The woman in it didn't match the profile picture of the person I had been messaging, not even close. Different face, different build, different hair. I looked at it for a moment and then looked away and told myself maybe the profile picture was old. Maybe she had changed a lot. People change. The second thing I noticed was the dogs. There were 4 of them. Not 2. 4 large dogs, and the 2 men were visibly rough with one of them in a way that made me uncomfortable to watch. When I asked about it, they both acted confused, like they didn't know what I was referring to, and one of them said it was his wife's dog, and sometimes it got a little wild. He was friendly to me throughout all of this. Very friendly, talkative, attentive, always seemed to appear in the kitchen when I came out, always had something to say. At the time, I read it as just being a social guy who was home a lot, but he would say things occasionally, small comments, offhand remarks, that landed just slightly wrong. Nothing you could point to directly, just a quality that made me want to finish the conversation and get back to my room. I got through the first 2 nights without incident. I kept my door locked. I didn't use the kitchen much. I made myself scarce and counted down the time until I could leave. The last night I was packing. Travel day was the next morning, and I was organizing my bag and getting ready for bed early. My door was closed. I heard a knock, 1 knock. And before I had time to respond, the door opened. He came in, pulled the door shut behind him, and sat down on the edge of my bed. I stood at the other end of the room with my bag half packed, and I looked at him, and I did not say anything. He started talking. He said he'd been thinking about the trip and how lonely the house felt without his wife. Said this kind of thing in a slow, casual way, like we were friends having a normal conversation. Then he said he didn't know how much longer he could stay faithful. He said it with this small, almost smile, and then he looked at me and said, "What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas." I want to be clear about what was happening in that moment. I was in a stranger's house in Las Vegas. I had been lied to about who lived there, who I was corresponding with, how many dogs there were. I was alone in a room with a man I did not know who had come in without permission, closed the door, and was sitting on my bed telling me he didn't know how faithful he intended to be. I don't know how long I engaged with that conversation before I lost it, longer than I should have. I kept trying to be reasonable, kept trying to redirect it, kept thinking there was a version of this that ended normally if I just handled it the right way. Eventually, I stopped doing that. I told him to get out of my room. I said it clearly, and I said it loudly enough that there was no ambiguity about it. He got up immediately, apologized, said he hadn't meant anything by it, went back into the hallway, and closed the door behind him. I locked the door and stood there for a while. Then I sat on the floor and texted a friend and told her exactly where I was and exactly what had happened and asked her to call me in 20 minutes to check I was okay. I did not sleep. I sat in that room with my bag already packed until it was light enough to leave without it feeling like I was fleeing, and then I left. I called an Airbnb support line from the parking lot of a gas station 2 blocks away. I reported everything. The misrepresentation of who the hosts were, the different woman in the wedding photo, the extra dogs, the comment, the door. Airbnb opened an investigation. I don't know what came of it. I never heard a follow-up that satisfied me. The listing may still be up for all I know. The same bait and switch may have happened to someone after me. The friendly messages from a woman's account. The arrival to find only men. The slow accumulation of wrong details. The slow accumulation of comments that land just slightly off. I still think about the wedding photo, about looking at it and looking away, about telling myself it was fine, about how many times in that house I told myself it was fine. Well past midnight, on a remote hilltop 2 miles down a gated private dirt road, I heard a car pull up outside the tent. And then I heard a man's voice say, clearly close enough to hear, "I think there are 3 of them." Let me explain how we got there. This was during the pandemic, 2020, one of those windows where you could technically go places, but the options were limited and everything felt strange. I had rented a glamping tent on someone's property in the hills outside Santa Clara County, a canvas bell tent on a barren hillside, remote enough that the listing specifically described it as an off-grid experience. 2 miles down a dirt road to get there. The gate at the road's entrance required a code. You couldn't find it by accident. I brought my kids. They were at the age where they thought glamping sounded like an adventure right up until the moment we actually got there, at which point the reality of it, no screens, no air conditioning, nothing to do on a windy hillside, set in immediately. By the first afternoon, they wanted to leave. I had driven out there, paid for the stay, and was not going to give up that easily. I told them we were staying and that it would be fun. It was fine during the day. The view was good. We ate outside and walked around the property, and the kids complained a moderate amount, and then settled into it the way kids do when they accept that the situation isn't changing. By evening, we were all in reasonable spirits. Then the sun went down and the wind picked up. A canvas tent in wind is a specific experience. Every gust moves the fabric, snaps the sides, rattles the tie-down lines. The whole structure breathes with the weather in a way that in daylight feels rustic and in the dark starts to feel like something else. By 10 at night, I was listening to every sound, trying to separate tent noise from anything else. I made myself lie down. Eventually, I fell asleep. It was well past midnight. The sound of an engine, coming up the dirt road, getting closer. I was awake immediately. I lay completely still and listened. The engine slowed and stopped. A car door opened, then another. More than one person getting out. We were 2 miles down a gated private road. The gate required a code. Nobody came down that road by accident, and nobody had any reason to be there at 2 in the morning except the property owner, who I had met briefly on arrival and who had made no mention of returning. Then the voice. Male. Calm. Close enough to hear clearly through the canvas. Not shouting, just talking at a normal volume to whoever was with him. And what he said was, "I think there are 3 of them." I did not move. I did not make a sound. My children were asleep beside me, and I lay there with my heart going and my whole body locked still, and I listened. 3 of them. He could see, or knew, or had somehow determined how many people were in the tent. He knew, and he was telling someone else. I have no way of knowing what he meant by it. I have no way of knowing if it was even about us or about something else entirely on that property. But I was a parent alone with 2 children in a canvas tent in the dark on a remote hilltop, and a man I could not see had just told someone how many of us there were, and my body responded to that information before my brain had finished processing it. I heard the car door again, then the engine, then the sound of it moving back up the road, getting quieter, and then nothing. I did not sleep after that. I lay there in the dark until the sky started to lighten, and then I got the kids up and packed everything into the car. They thought it was an early adventure. They were excited about leaving before sunrise. I did not tell them why we were going. I reported it through Airbnb. The host said she had no idea who would have been on the property at that hour and no explanation for how anyone would have had the gate code. She seemed genuinely confused. Airbnb offered a partial refund on her behalf. I've thought about that voice a lot since then, about the specific quality of what he said. Not alarmed, not cautious, just matter of fact, informational. The tone of someone noting something relevant to a plan. I think there are 3 of them. I still don't know what happens after that sentence if we had still been asleep when they got out of the car. We walked into the Airbnb and it looked like the owner had just stepped out for the afternoon. Food in the fridge, personal items on the counter. His whole life, exactly as he had left it. It took us about an hour to figure out that he hadn't just stepped out. He had died. My husband and I had been planning this trip for a few months, a 2-week stay in another state, partly vacation, partly looking at the area as somewhere we might eventually want to live. We found the listing on Airbnb, and everything about the booking looked completely normal. Confirmation, check-in instructions, the code for the electronic lock. We stopped on the way to pick up groceries because some of them needed refrigeration, so those were the first things we carried in when we arrived. When I opened the fridge to put things away, it was full. Not just a few items, a fully stocked fridge, the kind that belongs to someone who lives there and did their weekly shopping recently. I closed it and looked around. There were things on the counter, a coffee mug, some mail, a jacket on one of the chairs. The kitchen had the particular quality of a room that someone uses every day, not staged, not cleaned for guests, just lived in. I called out to see if anyone was home. No answer. We walked through the rooms carefully, not sure what we were walking into. Every room had the same quality. Personal belongings in place, nothing packed away, nothing cleared for a guest. This was not a vacation rental that someone had prepared for us. This was someone's home, occupied, and we had just walked into it. We called Airbnb immediately. They connected us with a representative who was apologetic and told us the owner had been informed we were coming and had said he would have things cleared up. They assured us it was fine to stay and to just move his belongings aside if they were in the way. My husband and I looked at each other across the kitchen and then looked at the jacket on the chair and decided to start by clearing things into a closet to at least make the space usable. That's when we found the medication. In the closet, as we were moving things in, there were several bottles of prescription medication, not vitamins or over-the-counter things. Serious medication, the kind that comes in pharmacy bottles with detailed instructions and warnings. We looked at the labels. We looked at the other papers nearby, the kind of documents that accumulate around a serious medical situation. My husband picked up one of the pages and read it quietly. Then he set it down and looked at me. Stage 4. We pieced it together over the next hour, quietly and without fully saying it out loud to each other. The owner had been receiving treatment for stage 4 cancer. The paperwork pointed to a specific timeline. Based on what we were reading, the treatment had stopped. Based on the date on some of the documents and the specific type of paperwork, notifications, arrangements, we were fairly certain the owner had died. Not recently enough that his belongings had been dealt with, but recently enough that the people handling his affairs had made arrangements to rent the property without coming to clear out his life first. His family had listed the house, his family had taken the bookings and given out the door code and collected the money, and they had done all of it without removing a single thing that belonged to him. We slept in that house for 2 weeks. We cooked in his kitchen with his things still in the cabinets. We sat in his living room with his books on the shelves. His mail kept arriving, and we stacked it on the counter. We lived inside the exact shape of a life that had recently ended, surrounded by everything that had been his, and the people who should have come to clear it had simply not come. I think about the coffee mug most, about the fact that the last time someone used it, the person who used it was him. And then it just sat there, while he was in the hospital and after, while his family made arrangements, while we booked the property and drove there and carried our groceries through the door. It just sat there waiting. I don't know if what his family did was intentional or an oversight or just the particular kind of avoidance that grief sometimes produces, the inability to go back to the place and face what's still in it. I don't know if anyone has been back since we stayed. I know that when we left, we stacked the mail we had collected neatly on the kitchen table. We washed his mug and put it back where we found it. It felt like the least we could do. And I have never fully stopped thinking about what it was like to be in that house, about the specific silence of a space that belongs to someone who is no longer anywhere. If these stories got to you, let me know in the comments. And if something happened to you at an Airbnb, something that didn't feel right, something you couldn't explain, share it below. I read every single one.